In the summer of 1984, Clara Whitmore watched the man her family had taught her to hate drive his tractor across her field. He wasn't there to steal her land. He was there to save her harvest. And by sunset, both families would know that the one thing they had spent 30 years trying to prevent had already happened. A Whitmore had fallen in love with a Callahan. But that afternoon, Clara didn't know any of that yet. All she knew was that the sky was turning black. Her corn stood nearly ready for harvest, rows of green stretching across the lower field. A storm was moving in from the west, and the wind had already begun bending the stalks. Then her combine died. Clara tried the ignition again. Nothing. She climbed down, opened the engine compartment and stared at the machinery. No. No. She had been farming long enough to know when a problem was beyond a quick repair. She looked toward the western horizon. They had perhaps 2 hours. Maybe less. Her father was away in town, and the nearest mechanic was already working on another farm. Then Clara heard an engine. She turned. A tractor was moving slowly along the boundary. Ethan Callahan. He stopped on the other side of the old fence. For several seconds they simply looked at each other. Clara had known Ethan for years without actually knowing him. They had attended the same school, passed each other at the county fair, seen each other's trucks on the same roads. But their families had made sure they never became friends. The Whitmores and Callahans had been enemies for nearly 30 years. And the old wooden fence between their farms had become a symbol of that hatred. Clara's father had told her countless times, "That fence stays where it is." Ethan's father had said something similar. Neither family crossed it. Not willingly. Not since 1956. Ethan looked at the broken combine. "You're in trouble." Clara folded her arms. "I noticed. I can help." "I don't need your help." He glanced at the sky. "You've got a storm coming." "I know. You won't get that machine running before it arrives." Clara looked away. She hated that he was right. Ethan climbed down from his tractor. "Let me see it." "You know my father wouldn't like that." "I know. Your father wouldn't either." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Then why are you here?" Ethan shrugged. "Because you're my neighbor." The words caught her off guard. Not Whitmore. Not enemy. Neighbor. He walked toward the combine. Clara hesitated before following. That was the first time they worked together. But it wasn't the first time they had crossed paths. That had happened months earlier. The broken fence. Spring had come late that year. Several days of rain had weakened the old boundary fence, and 2 of Clara's calves escaped into the neighboring pasture. She spent nearly an hour chasing them through the mud. When she finally returned to the fence, she found one section collapsed. She grabbed a hammer. The first nail bent. The second split the board. The third disappeared into the mud. "Wonderful." A voice came from behind her. "You're holding the hammer wrong." Clara froze. Ethan stood several yards away. "I know how to hold a hammer." He looked at the crooked board. "Doesn't look like it." She glared at him. "Go away, Callahan." He walked toward the fence. "I didn't say I was staying." He took the hammer from her. Within minutes the fence was repaired. Clara watched him work. "You've done this before." "I grew up on a farm." "So did I." "I noticed." He handed the hammer back. Then he walked away. Clara watched him disappear. "Thank you," she called. He raised one hand without turning around. It was a small moment. Neither knew how important it would become. The families. The Whitmore and Callahan feud had begun in 1956. At least that's what everyone said. The story had been passed from parents to children so many times that the original facts had disappeared beneath years of anger. The Whitmores claimed the Callahans had betrayed them over a piece of land. The Callahans claimed the Whitmores had changed an agreement and stolen what belonged to them. Nobody agreed on exactly what happened, but everyone agreed on who was to blame. The other family. Clara had grown up hearing that Callahans could never be trusted. Ethan had grown up hearing the same thing about Whitmores. Neither had questioned it. Not until they met each other. And neither realized that the old feud was about to become their problem. Because after Ethan helped Clara with the fence, they started noticing each other. And slowly, they started talking. Their conversations began with farming. "What are you planting?" Corn on the south field. That's a bad place for corn. Ethan looked at her. You've been studying my farm? I've been studying farming. He smiled. Sure. Clara rolled her eyes. But she smiled too. A few weeks later, her tractor broke down. Ethan found her standing beside it. You need help. I can fix it. Of course. He examined the engine. Fuel line. She watched him work. You always this annoying? Only with Whitmores. She laughed. That was the first time Ethan heard her laugh. He liked it. And that frightened him. The storm. Then came the summer storm. Clara was securing equipment inside her barn when part of the roof tore loose. Ethan saw the damage from his side of the property. He crossed the distance between them without thinking. They worked for more than an hour in heavy rain. When they finally finished, they stood beneath the barn overhang, soaked and exhausted. Clara looked at him. You know we're not supposed to do this. I know. My father would be furious. Mine too. Then why did you come? Ethan looked at her. Because you needed help. That answer stayed with her. After that night, their relationship changed. Not suddenly. Quietly. Ethan began leaving small things near her barn. A replacement tractor belt. Coffee. Work gloves. Once a bag of peaches. Clara finally confronted him. You keep leaving things. I don't know what you're talking about. She held up the gloves. You bought these. He looked at her hands. Your old ones had holes. She looked down. They did. She smiled. Thank you. You're welcome. The creek. Behind the farms was a narrow creek surrounded by cottonwood trees. It became their secret place. They met there after long days of work. They talked about everything their families would never have allowed them to talk about. Clara told him she once dreamed of studying agricultural science. Ethan admitted he wanted to modernize his father's farm. They talked about leaving, staying, marriage, children, dreams, things they had never told anyone. One evening, Clara looked across the creek at him. My father would never forgive me. Ethan nodded. My father might disown me. Then why are you still here? Ethan looked at her. Because every time I tell myself I shouldn't come back. He smiled. I come back anyway. Clara looked away. She knew exactly what he meant. The first kiss. Their first kiss wasn't planned. They were sitting beside the creek after sunset. Their shoulders touched. Neither moved. Clara whispered. This is a mistake. I know. We shouldn't. I know. She looked at him. Then why aren't you leaving? Because I'm hoping you won't. She kissed him. It lasted only seconds. But everything changed. Clara rested her forehead against his. We can't tell anyone. Not yet. Promise. Promise. They thought they were alone. They weren't. Someone had seen them. The discovery. The next morning, Clara's father found a man's work glove near the creek. He knew immediately who it belonged to. A Callahan. That evening he confronted Clara. How long? She said nothing. Robert Whitmore placed the glove on the table. How long have you been seeing him? Clara finally looked up. Long enough to know he's not what you say he is. Her father's face hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me. He looked away. What did the Callahans actually do? Silence. Clara stepped closer. You've told me to hate them my entire life. But you've never told me why. Robert's expression changed. For the first time, Clara saw something beneath his anger. Fear. And across the boundary, Ethan was having the same conversation with his father. Neither family gave the young couple an answer. Only warnings. So Ethan and Clara decided to find the truth themselves. They began searching quietly. Old newspapers, county records, farm journals, tax documents, anything mentioning the land dispute of 1956. At first, they found only contradictions. The original agreement had supposedly been signed in May. Another county record said June. One newspaper claimed the land had been jointly purchased. Another suggested one family had secretly purchased the other's share. Something was wrong. Then Clara found an old photograph. It showed their grandfathers standing together in 1956. They weren't fighting. They were smiling. and between them stood a man neither Clara nor Ethan recognized. Harold Mercer, a local land agent. On the back of the photograph was a handwritten sentence. Thomas and James have finally settled everything. Construction can begin in October. Construction? They had never heard of construction. They kept digging. Eventually, Clara visited her 82-year-old grandmother. When the old woman saw the photograph, her face changed. "Where did you find this?" "In the barn." Her grandmother stared at Harold Mercer. "I haven't thought about that man in years." "Grandma, what happened in 1956? The old woman looked at Ethan. Then Clara. "Your grandfathers were friends." Clara's heart stopped. Friends? Very close friends. Then why did they hate each other? Her grandmother lowered her voice. Because Harold Mercer made them believe the other had betrayed him. Ethan leaned forward. "Why?" "Money." She explained that a planned railway expansion had suddenly made the disputed acreage extremely valuable. Mercer wanted control of the land. He altered documents. He created false copies. He told Thomas Whitmore that James Callahan had changed their agreement. He told James that Thomas had secretly claimed his share. Both men believed they had been betrayed. The friendship ended. The families turned against each other. But there was something else. Clara's grandmother said Thomas Whitmore eventually discovered the truth. He tried to make things right. Did he? He tried. What happened? James had already died. Silence filled the room. 30 years of hatred had survived longer than the men who had started it. But Clara still wanted proof. The box. They returned to the Whitmore barn. They searched every old cabinet, shelf and storage room. Then Clara noticed something behind an old wooden beam. A small metal box. Her grandfather's initials were scratched into the lid. Inside were several documents. A bank receipt. An old copy of the land agreement. And a letter. The letter was from Harold Mercer. It wasn't a full confession, but it was enough. Mercer admitted manipulating the documents and deliberately turning the two families against each other. He had planned to acquire the land after the dispute forced them into financial trouble. Clara's hands trembled. "We were fighting over land he wanted." Ethan nodded. For 30 years. They had finally found the truth. But the truth alone couldn't erase 30 years of hatred. They needed their families to see it. Before they could reveal the documents, the weather changed. The harvest was approaching. And a massive storm was moving toward the valley. Clara's combine broke down. Her corn was ready. If the storm destroyed it, she could lose the year's income. Her father refused to ask the Callahans for help. "We'll manage," he said. But Clara knew they couldn't. The Callahan farm had the only nearby combine capable of harvesting her field in time. And Ethan knew it too. He looked across the boundary. For 30 years, that fence had separated the families. Now it was standing between Clara and everything she had worked for. Ethan knew what he had to do. But he also knew what it would cost. The storm arrived earlier than expected. By afternoon, the sky had turned almost black. Wind tore through the corn. Clara stood beside her dead combine, watching the first lightning strike in the distance. Then she heard an engine. She turned. Ethan was driving toward her. Behind him was the Callahan combine. He stopped at the boundary. For a moment he didn't move. Neither did Clara. Then Ethan looked at the old fence. He had spent his entire life being told never to cross it. His father was watching from across the road. Clara's father was watching from her field. Everyone was watching. Ethan opened the gate. The combine rolled through. A Callahan had crossed onto Whitmore land. Robert Whitmore stared. Ethan's father stepped out of his truck. Neither man spoke. Ethan drove toward Clara. "We don't have much time." Clara climbed into the cab. They started harvesting. The first rows disappeared beneath the machine. Then the rain came. Heavy drops hammered the windshield. Lightning flashed. The wind grew stronger. But they kept going. One row. Then another. Then another. From the edge of the field, Robert Whitmore watched. His daughter was working beside the son of the family he'd hated for 30 years. And suddenly he understood something. The fence had never protected his family. It had imprisoned them. Robert climbed into his tractor. His wife stared at him. Where are you going? He looked toward the field. To help. Across the road, Ethan's father watched Robert enter the field. For a moment he stood frozen. Then he climbed into his own tractor. One by one the families followed. Whitmores, Callahans, brothers, sisters, parents, children. Everyone worked together. The same families who had refused to speak for 30 years now stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the storm. By midnight the final load was safely stored. The rain continued falling. Everyone gathered beneath the barn roof. Robert Whitmore held the old letter in his hand. He looked at Ethan's father. James never betrayed us. The older Callahan shook his head. No. Robert's voice broke. Thomas didn't betray you either. For 30 years, those two men had carried anger inherited from fathers who were long gone. Now there was nothing left to protect. Robert extended his hand. Ethan's father stared at it, then took it. No speech. No dramatic apology. Just a handshake. 30 years of hatred began to disappear in a few seconds. Clara looked at Ethan. He reached for her hand. This time neither family objected. The fence comes down. The truth about Harold Mercer was eventually confirmed through the old documents and county records. The families learned that the land dispute had been manufactured. Their grandfathers had never betrayed one another. They had been victims of the same deception. But by then, the land itself no longer seemed important. Something bigger had happened. The families had found one another again. The old boundary fence remained standing through the winter. Then in the spring of 1985, Ethan and Clara took it down. They didn't destroy the wood. They built a bench from it and placed it beside the creek where they had first fallen in love. Months later, Ethan and Clara were married. Both families attended. There was no Whitmore side. No Callahan side. Just one gathering. Years passed. The two farms remained separate on paper, but their lives became intertwined. Their children grew up running freely across both properties. And whenever those children asked about the old wooden bench beside the creek, Clara would tell them about the fence. She would tell them that once two families believed the fence was protecting them. Then she'd look at Ethan. He would smile. And Clara would say, "It took us 30 years to realize the fence wasn't protecting us." Her children would ask, "What was it doing?" She would look across the fields. "Keeping us apart." Ethan would add, "And sometimes the hardest thing to remove isn't a fence." Clara would finish, "It's the story people have been telling themselves about why the fence is there." The fields stretched together beneath the open sky. No boundary divided them anymore. Only rows of corn, golden wheat, and the long road leading home. For 30 years a fence had divided two families. It took two young farmers falling in love to finally tear it down.